a warm welcome on behalf of the CISO Forum and the 9.9 Group to today's webinar. Given the growing importance of data in digital transformation, today we will be discussing how to develop a robust data governance strategy. The reason for this is all organizations today are awash in data, both structured and unstructured. This data is being gathered from a variety of systems and business processes, and the volume, speed, and variety of this data is growing by the day. So it is becoming important that organizations have an effective way to manage the entire life cycle of gathering, organizing, storing, and using data. In fact, the data management and governance challenge has become even more acute in recent times, given the plethora of compliance mandates from various regulators and the new Digital Personal Data Protection Act. Our expert today, Mr. Mayuresh Purandare, is the head of IT infrastructure and security at Mumbai headquartered multinational consumer goods company Marico. As the leader of the company's IT transformation and security groups, he collaborates closely with various business stakeholders on the organization's digital transformation initiatives and is actively involved with the data governance and management. Prior to Marico, Mayuresh has worked with organizations across a variety of industry sectors and organizations. In recognition of his work and future potential, he was selected as a Next 100 Award winner in 2020. Before we start, I would like to request the delegates may please post their questions for Mr. Purandare in the Q&A box. We will take them up at the end of the session. So welcome to today's webinar, Mr. Purandare. So let me start off by asking you, what is data governance and what is the difference between data management and data governance?
Thanks, Giri. I think, and first of all, thanks a lot for having me on this webinar. Data management and data governance, it's not a new topic. I think we have been doing this in IT for many years. Earlier, it was mainly driven by the CIOs, and now it is becoming a pain for CISOs, right? So I think data management is mainly, people have been doing in terms of maybe having a master data management team, right? So there is a central team or a smaller chunks of the master data is being managed. Then the transactional data came in. Then the first party, third party data came in, right? So because of such exponential growth in not the amount of data, but the type of data, I think there is acute need of a governance, right? So management has always been there, but I think governance is a need of a time where you create a kind of a over archiving processes around it, and then look at it from the various perspective, right? So that's I think in my view the main difference between the management and the governance.
So thank you. So can we say that data governance is some kind of policing or control of the data? Is that how we would put it?
See, I would put it as it's like creating a rule, right? Now whether people are following the rule or not, it's a question number two. But first is having a rule, right?
Okay.
So I think the governance part, it starts with having a rule, and then as a part of it, then obviously somebody has to also check. Now manually checking is not possible, so obviously there are various options available out there. But yeah, governance is not only policing. That's what I would like to say.
Thank you. So so then going on to my next question, so what are the key principles for creating this set of rules or a data governance framework, and what is the kind of structure we need to have for this?
I think, Giri, for answering this question, I will not wear a CISO hat. I would like to wear an organization hat, because data is the organization's data, and solving data problems are organization's problems, right? They are not only CISOs or CIOs problems. So in my view, if you want to create a proper framework, it should start with some principles and priorities. So for example, you need to categorize the data into whether it is a master data, transactional data, first party data, third party data, benchmarking data, right? Outside in data, then structured data, unstructured data, right? So you first create those principles, and then you prioritize. Then what creates more priority? Maybe for a bank or so, the customer transactions is the first priority. Is the top priority data. So you can, for your organizations, for your industry, you can select the compartments or the buckets, do the priority. That is a step number one. Step number two is who is generating this data, right? There are users who are generating this data. The data could be generated by customers, by internal organizations, right? So at the end, all those data principles should have a data literacy, that yes, I am a custodian of that data, and I should be aware that yes, I am the generator of that data. So that ownership with this data literacy is a step number two. Step number three, in my view, is, once you have that in place, then as an organization, we need to create a proper team structure with the proper roles and responsibility. That once we know what is the data, how are we going to, who is going to work on what? Like you said, right? Who will create the laws and who will do the policing? Both are equally important, but those roles and responsibility needs to be clearly defined. Then you define a governance process. Then the next step will be the automation of that governance process, because obviously looking at the amount of data, it is practically impossible to do the manual controls. So put some automation around it, and then keep on checking whether there is a transparency and accountability which is there throughout the process, so with some KPIs. So in my view, there are 6 steps under which we can actually create a proper governance framework.
So when we to expand a little bit on this question of creating a governance framework, so
Mhm.
what do you see as the critical roles in this? What are the critical processes and what are the critical roles in this governance?
Uh, See, in my view, uh, the roles should. So before we go to the roles, right, we need to first identify the principles, right?
Right.
So, generally, I would generally go around that strategy is, we will first start, because at the end, it should make, your data strategy should be aligned with the business priority, right? So, how do we structure from the business priority, right? So let's say you start with identifying the risks. So how do you identify the risk? First of all, in many sectors I have seen data theft is not even identified as a risk in the risk register, right? So have you started from that? So that is the step number one, right? Then once we identify, yes, it is a risk, then do we have a proper data container repository and data flow diagrams, that how the data is flowing from one container to another and who is the owner of that particular container. Then the third step is identify the existing controls, right? Because I'm sure no organization is having zero controls. I'm sure there are some controls. Then the fourth point is there a gap? Are those enough? Right? So then you do a gap assessment. And then the fifth step is actually a gap remediation, right? So if you follow this structure, right, automatically we'll be able to create a governance and also define the right roles of those particular containers, because each container owner should know, yes, I am the owner of that container. Like, for an example, we were having this internal discussions on the same, and we were trying to identify the who is the owner of the container of legal agreements, right? So because every department has their own agreements, right? So
Right.
is it the every department who is the owner of the that container, or is it the central legal team who is going to be a owner of that container? So these are the conversations need to happen within the organization, and then finally you identify and define. So in our case, we finally define that yes, the central legal team will be the owner of that particular container, right? So I think it's an evolving thing. You need to be having these kind of conversations within the organization.
But to take a slightly more complicated problem, let us say like
Hmm.
supply chain.
Hmm.
Now, who is the owner of that container? Given that it flows across procurement, manufacturing, distribution.
So when you talk about supply chain as a whole, right? Yeah, we feel that it's a very very broad department, but somewhere each department has created their own silos. So like for example, in Marico also, in supply chain we have something called as uh, procure, means source to manufacture,
Right.
right? That is the input supply chain. Then there is another supply chain which is manufacture to distribution, right? So there's another part of the supply chain. So we have also created those, kind of a small buckets within the overall supply chain. And then we say, let's say it is a procurement data, it falls under whom? If it is, let's say, primary sales data, it falls under whom? Right? So again, you have to do these conversations, identify those containers. If it is too large of a bucket, try and break it down and then assign a owner.
Thank you. That's really very helpful, coming from a very practical perspective as to how to do it, because we have often seen that when it comes to data, the responsibility can be quite diffuse as to who is the responsible for it. And then there is a lot of, if things go wrong, then there is a lot of finger pointing all over the place.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
you had mentioned another very important point, that how do we ensure that this data governance strategy is aligning with the organization's business objectives as well as its risk management goals?
Yeah.
So do you have any advice, and what do you see as the challenges over there?
So I think, as I said, right, it is not only one department's job. So what we have done for, addressing it to the business objective is, we have something called as a enterprise crisis management committee. So that crisis management committee is comprising of all the departments, right? Now, with the DPDP coming in, and we actually started little earlier than the DPDP actually came into the picture, that the crisis management team also is now working as a data governance team, right? Not all the stakeholders are equally important, but they are all informed, right? So that is where, we have started aligning all the stakeholders, saying what are you doing as a part of your business and how it will impact my data governance. So we have a monthly calls with each other. We do kind of a training within the team, right? So as to ensure that, if something new is coming up, new product is getting launched, for which, let's say there are new kind of market research is being done, right? So that triggers everyone's ears that, okay, that means there is some new data which is going to come, right? So that kind of practices is something we started doing, just to ensure that organization business objective is taken care of.
The second part, as you mentioned, the issue about new data flowing in, maybe it is from a new source, maybe it is from a new project, maybe it is
Yeah.
from some new activity that the organization has taken up. Then how do you make sure that it is part of your data governance strategy? Because often the related thing is, you have shadow IT,
Yeah.
you have departments going and doing things. So how do you make sure that it's part of your strategy and it's taken care of?
Right. See, somewhere, we all need to accept that no one department will be able to identify all the data within the organization. So you will, maybe we should focus more on being 80% accurate, but with 100% speed, rather than being 100% accurate with 80% speed or with 60% speed, right? So I think accuracy is never going to be 100%, but at least you can do frequent reviews, right? Now, obviously, for certain type of data, the frequent reviews are impossible, but for certain type of data, the frequent review is important. So the area where the frequent review is impossible, you try and automate it by putting some tools, right? So there are enough tools available in the market who will keep on, scanning the data around and just keep on throwing you the dashboard saying, this much of PII data is there, this much of PSI data is there, right? This is so those tools are available. But let's say nobody informed that, we are buying some data from a marketing agency,
Right.
right? So such kind of things can only be discussed during the reviews. So, set up those monthly cadences, ask some questions, do those interviews with the stakeholders, right? Or the usual suspects, right? That who are the people who are kind of, trying to get that kind of a data very often, right?
Okay.
So go do that.
So I think what you are advising is have frequent communication, and make sure that, your strategy continues to be aligned, and, and everybody is aware that it needs to be done. Uh,
Yeah.
Another related question is, then how flexible does your data governance policy need to be? Do you keep changing it every now and then, or is it a policy which is set, for 6 months, 1 year? I mean, what is the kind of way you do this?
See, if you ask me, policy should not change, right? Because policy is very over-archiving thing, right? So let's say, how do you define a personally sensitive information? That is mentioned in a policy. That cannot change.
Right.
What can change only are the data buckets, right? So for an example, let's say earlier the PSI information was only available in the, let's say, the LIMS system, the laboratory management system. Okay, but now it is also being transferred to, let's say, a SharePoint where my marketing team is keeping the data, right? So only the buckets can change, and those needs to be reviewed. But I don't think so. The policy should change very frequently. But obviously, the data flow diagrams will keep on changing, and the data buckets will keep on changing.
Okay. So another thing which you had also mentioned, that we need to classify the data. Now, how do we create this right criteria for classifying data, particularly now that we have a lot of regulatory requirements into it, which keep changing? The regulator keeps issuing new guidances or new requirements every now and then.
No, so absolutely, I think, and that is always going to be a moving target, and there is no one answer or one product or one solution or no magic wand out there which will help you do that. But I think we just have to create, again, as we said, we need to create the frameworks, right? And the technologies, because the automation, there are enough technologies available who will keep on checking, right? What kind of data is getting plugged in automatically. The data classification can happen. The challenge that I have seen so far in the industry is, uh, people have implemented a lot of data classification tools on their Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, but they may not have those on, let's say, their SAP, right? So let's say a SAP, you can download a PDF report, and that PDF report has no classification,
Right.
right? So those are the challenges currently which are out there. So data classification can happen, obviously a rule based, but somewhere we also need to make every person in the organization accountable, because every person is creating a data, right? So every person needs to be accountable for their data. So I'll give you an example. Uh, when we started this exercise of entire data classification and data, obviously putting controls on the classified data, right? Uh, we actually thought that, uh, the most resistance would come from the marketing team, right? Because they keep on working with various agencies. They probably use V transfers, WhatsApps, and whatnot, right, to share the data and all. Uh, to to our surprise, when we started involving them, obviously we never got to them saying this is the rule, just follow and we will be policing, right? We included them as a part of the strategy. We told them why it is important. We told them you will face issues, and we told them that we will be assigning dedicated people for you to solve your issues. Let's run it for 3 months, but it has to be done, right? With that, they are the first ones actually to got onboarded on the classification part. Now each individual in marketing is actually classifying the data on their own, because now they own that data. They know if I'm creating an asset, that asset falls under which category, right? So I think it's just a matter of culture you need to drive as a leader. uh, Obviously, you will not be, again, as I said, 100% there. Start with 60-70% accuracy and then get there.
I think you make a good point about culture and the fact that 100% might be a very ambitious target, but you have to start somewhere and
Yeah.
move this along.
Yeah.
So given that we can't be 100% good, so what kind of data security measures do we need to put in place, at least to secure the very sensitive and critical data assets? Every company has certain critical data assets where they need to be
Right.
cautious.
So, if you ask me honestly, the data assets, you should not have a strategy for data assets. you should always have a strategy for a data container.
Okay.
Like for an example, let's say now PAN card data or PAN card number is a data asset, right? But if that is available in SAP, you will have a different type of control. If it is available in, let's say, a web portal, you will have a different type of control. If it is available in somebody's CV or a Word file,
Right.
you will have a different type of control, right? So these are the buckets you need to identify for a particular type of asset. So as I said, start with the asset to mapping with the what type of container to the data flows. So what are the data flows, right? So that you can then put controls either on the container or on the flows, because there are no technologies available for all type of containers, but there are technologies available in all sorts of flows, right?
Okay.
So like for an example, uh, maybe there is no technology available. Maybe I may be wrong. Maybe there are nowadays a lot of technologies available. I'm not aware of 100% of them. But let's, for an example, let's say there is no technology available to uh, classify the data within SAP. Okay, but there are technologies available when you download a report from SAP and it is downloaded on your endpoint. At that time, a label will be automatically applied depending on what type of data is within that PDF or that CSV or that Excel, right? So, and that is called as a, when your data is actually transferred from one container to another. Let's say SAP container to my desktop as a container, right? So that's where you need to identify where do you put what type of controls.
So, if I may ask you, how common is it for people to use the kind of model that you are describing, which is, make things as containers and then apply rules to them? Is this a common way of doing, or is this something which is now coming up?
I don't know if it is a common way of doing, but I know for sure it is the right way of doing.
Okay.
But what I have seen is, I have been working with all these big fours for last few years in all this data privacy part, and I think more or less everyone is now kind of coming up with the same strategy. So the reason is, otherwise, if you do not have a structured approach, right, you will end up spraying and praying, right?
That's right.
So you will just feel that, okay, I have deployed two good solutions from the market. That means I am secured. But if you do not have this proper structured way of identification, risk assessment, gap assessment, and then remediation of that particular bucket, right, or the data bucket, right, it's very difficult to really manage the entire program.
So, from your experience, now that you have been doing it, how much effort is required to define these buckets and make sure you have got them right, because that seems to be the foundation of the strategy that you are suggesting.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. So I'll give you an example. When we did it for employee strength of around 2,000 people. At that time, it took us a good 6 months to actually come up to the phase of gap assessment. And once the gap assessment is done, right, you might have to put controls on, let's say, 20 different containers, and let's say those 20 different containers may result into maybe 3 to 4 products, right? Because one product may be kept, compatible with 2 to 3 containers, right? So and again, you have to also look at the budgets, the
Yes.
priorities. As I said, priority also is important. So then you prioritize that, in year one I will put the controls on these 5 containers, year two I will put the controls on these 10 containers, right? So that's how we actually did it. But yeah, so we created a kind of a 2 year roadmap for it. So we are now in the second year. So hopefully, the rest of the containers now we will be working on.
So, is there then a risk that you may end up having too many containers or too few containers?
No, I think it's a very good question, because we realized that people used to keep same data at multiple containers. Just to give a simple example, right? Uh, let's say HR. Now, this is I'm giving an example of which is the industry agnostic, right?
Right.
Now, HR different ways, right? So if you create a data flow diagram of HR, sorry, Giri, you're
Yeah.
not audible.
Yeah. Now you're okay. Yeah.
Okay, great, great. So let's say a standard process of HR seeking CVs from the participants in the interview process, right? What are the different ways in which they get the data? They might get it from their corporate portal. They might get it on a common email address. They might get it on internal job portals. They might get it on WhatsApps. They might get it on the in an email, right? So if you see just for one data type, which is a CV, which also has a PII data, right? Most of the people put passport number, PAN number, and whatnot, right?
Right.
So now that becomes your data. And if you see for one data, there are 5 different containers. Then what we started doing is we started telling this to HR that if at all somebody, you reduce the number of containers, you close down the portals which are not needed, you close down the email IDs which are not needed, just create a channelized or structured flow of that particular data. If somebody is sending you a data on WhatsApp, okay, please respond saying, unfortunately I'm not able to take this CV over on WhatsApp. I'm deleting it for now. This is the portal at which please upload.
Right.
Right, so this is a habit that we need to create. But you're absolutely right, we need to reduce the number of containers. Otherwise, the data is just everywhere.
So I mean, just for sanity's sake, we need to keep control on the number of containers that we are managing,
Yeah,
because otherwise then you have these problems of data being everywhere.
yeah.
But how do you solve this problem where, you know, data moves from one container to another? So are the copies of the data then sitting on every container?
So see,
Because
if
then that will
you
create new storage problems.
no, no, absolutely. So see, the data policy and the data governance policy, right? Or the that entire thing, will have to have a strategy for archival, strategy for deletion, right? So having let's imagine that is already there, right? But still, what you said is the problem is still going to happen, right? Even the data will move from one container to another, sometimes even without people noticing it, right? Like for an example, some let's say there's a shared folder which is created on, let's say, a OneDrive,
Right.
and HR has shared that folder with, let's say, 3 different consultants, and it just left open. The position is filled, but still the OneDrive is kept open, right? So for such kind of, so you'll do, once you identify the containers, like OneDrive is a container, right? So there are these CASB programs which are available, which you can run over the containers and then come up with the automated exception saying these are the files which are shared publicly for more than 90 days. Please review or stop the sharing, right? Then there is automated remediation. You can create a policy which says that any folder which is found to be open to public straight away will be unshared as an admin from the admin side. So all those CASB rules are nowadays available in the market, right? So it depends on the type of container. You can push those rules and ensure that even if the data is getting transferred, some kind of a policing is happening on it.
Very good. So you have mentioned, while we were discussing a lot of tools and technologies. So can you suggest, what should be in the CISOs and the IT heads tool
Mm-hmm.
chest, literally to deploy for, ensuring that we have good data governance?
I think it's a great thought starter, because I have been seeing in the market, more and more organizations are now actually investing into or splitting the role of a CISO. Okay, what they're trying to do is they're actually creating a role of a CISO as a governance person, and then there is a chief security technology officer.
Okay.
Okay, this is a new thing which is
You
coming
think?
up, where these are the people who will be actually putting the control, and there's a separate team who are actually creating the governance frameworks, right? Because the governance people may not understand the tools,
Right.
right? Because tools is a technical thing, right? And somebody has to be technically expert to do that. So having said that, let's imagine you have a CISO or a CTDO or the CTSO something, right? So if you have that, right, then uh, some of the tools that we need to invest into is like, obviously you start from the data classification, right? Classification is important. Then you put the control on the classified data. You have CASBs, right? There are also tools which are available for digital asset management. Otherwise, many a times it has been seen that people nowadays have lot of digital data, digital assets. Right? It could be your product images, it could be your TVCs, it could be even your the laboratory data. All of that is created as a digital asset nowadays, right? So there is a DAM, right? Digital asset management tools which are available, and the CASB can connect with the DAMs, right? So get a CASB and get a DAM which is compatible with the CASB. Then create the vendor frameworks, because all said and done, we all work with a lot of vendors and we exchange a lot of data with them. We get a lot of data from them, right? So I think how do we create a structure with our vendors with proper contracts, or by checking or having a right to audit, check what if they are doing what they are saying, right? So those are, it's not a tool, but it's a control, right? And the new thing which is coming up, and obviously it is going to be a need of an hour for most of us, is the entire consent management system,
Right.
right? So that is a new tools which are available in the market, and new startups are coming up with a lot of these consent management tools, where it starts from the cookie consent to up to the delete my account from your
Yes. Forget me.
website, forget me, right? So it has the complete life cycle management, right? So these are the different tools which are available out there, and I'm sure that's the reason number of tools are increasing, and that's why there's a role of a chief security
Chief
technical
Technology Officer,
technology
Security
officer,
Chief
right?
Officer.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
So a related thing to this, I mean, two things. Number one is legacy data. You would have collected data in the last 20 years, 30 years, 50 years of operations. How do you classify all that data now? I mean, and who will do it?
No,
And the
absolutely.
second part to this is, we are all now operating in a hybrid cloud kind of environment. Then how do you enforce all this data strategy and data governance on that kind of a operating model?
No, no, absolutely. So I think you're right. First of all, we are all hybrid, and all said and done, it again depends on the industry to industry, right? But for many industries, like banking and all, there is no concept of work from home. The laptop cannot be taken home. Even if you are taking a laptop into home, you are actually logging into a Citrix machine and then working, right?
Right.
So it's pretty much a hardened ecosystem. But for non-banking kind of a sector, right, where the people are actually everywhere, and the data is also flowing everywhere, and I think that is where this entire automation comes in picture. So automation is one. Second one is the culture of accountability, of taking the accountability of data, that comes in picture. And even if you have both, right, uh, there will still be some lapses, right? Are you ready for handling those lapses is also very equally important, right? So because how many times we are do DR drill has been happening for many years, right? How many times we are actually doing a drill of a data loss as a use case, right? So run those drills, be prepared for it, right? There will be ransom. Nowadays
Yes.
I don't know, there is a different ransom which is coming in. So there are a lot of ethical hackers, right? Now those ethical hackers will come to you saying there is a problem in your portal or in your site, and we have access to your data, and you give us a bug bounty,
Okay.
else we will report. It is also kind of a ransom, if you ask me. Right? So we as a part of this data management also, right, we need to be ready for such kind of incidences. These are going to happen. I have seen myself in, I have come across a couple of such folks who tried. So we have a lot of the startups working with us, right? So for some of the startups, they actually ask for such kind of data, such kind of money, saying, we want a bug bounty, right? And they actually say the bug bounty should be 5% of the revenue,
Okay,
right?
that's
So
quite a bit.
that's quite a big, right? And so how do you handle them? How do you address them? How do you handle such situation is also going to be a part of somewhere. If the data gets breached for some reason, right? How do you handle that? So that is also coming up as a new area that we all need to learn.
So a little bit, if you would like can comment on this issue of legacy data, and that seems to be a problem for a lot of people. You know,
Agree.
so how do
No, no,
we do
absolutely
that?
agree.
Are there tools
No.
or technologies for doing it?
So again, I will go back to the same thing. If your legacy data is there, what is the container? If your container is, let's say, a shared drive, okay, the most legacy container is shared drive. It's there for probably last 20, since the Windows server has come in, right?
Right.
Microsoft has given a shared drive as a technology. So if shared drive is a container, there are technologies which are available who will crawl through your shared drive. You define the rules, and automatically the data will be classified as per the rule, and any unclassified data which is not fitting into rule will automatically be tagged as a default label, right? So there are tools available nowadays also to work on the legacy data. But again, as I if I go back to a legacy data just stored in a SQL server, having no encryption on the table level, right? Now that is a different container and different technical problem to solve. So depending on the container, and there is a solution to everything. I'm not saying there's no solution. I'm just saying identify the container and then propose a solution as per that.
Okay. There is a thing which you have sort of frequently mentioned, about the culture aspect, that a lot of culture is to do with people. So how do we, train and sensitize employees about this data governance and, security and privacy, all these new things that are coming?
Yeah, yeah. See, actually, culture. I think the founding stone of a culture is a empathy, right? Somewhere we need to empathize with all our staff that they are absolutely unaware of everything, right? So first, and we should not be boiling our blood over it, right? This is how the user is going to be. This is how the departments are going to be. So if you start from there, then so what we did. So I will just give you some of the insights that what we did. And obviously there could be better ways to do it, but I'm just giving you some examples of what we did, and we found a little bit of success there is we actually created cross-functional teams. And the cross-functional team comprises of IT, cybersecurity governance, legal, HR, admin, and operations. Now, these folks actually were assigned different verticals. So one person will work with 2 to 3 verticals, and they will actually set up these kind of webinars, right, for all the members. And then once those webinars are done, then we launched a mandatory quiz, right, which will be assigned to everyone. That go through the quiz and understand how much you have understood through the webinars. If you fail to pass the quiz, you have to again go through a online kind of a CBT kind of a computer based
Remedial
training,
class.
reality video class, right? And then you go through it. So we have kind of made it mandatory once a year, right? So and what we do internally also, we have created that as a KPI, that are we moving the needle. Like let's say last year only 60% people could finish it, right? Are we now moving from 60% to 65%, 70%, right? So as I said, 100% is a good target to have, but somewhere we need to accept that yes, it will not happen, but try until you get there.
So, talking about KPIs and metrics, overall, what do you recommend, should be tracked to assess the success of your data governance strategy? What are you measuring?
Okay, so again, I will take a little bit of step back. We are again going back to saying it's organization's data governance strategy. and we are not talking about the data security or only
Right.
the security aspects of it, right? So in that case, your KPIs are actually widened. It is not only the security KPIs, right? So I'll give you some examples of KPIs, right? Uh, first KPI could be when you started identifying the data buckets, right? How many data buckets did you review in that particular quarter? Let's say you have created a proper hierarchy. You have already given a assignment that okay, this person is given a task to manage these data buckets, right? So the KPI will be, have you done the review of those data buckets, right? Then have you understood, or have you done during the review, what are the different KPIs did you review? Like, have you checked the cleanliness of the data? Have you checked the consistency of the data? Have you checked the correctness of the data? Right? Completeness of the data, right? Then earlier, when we discussed your data container used to talk to this data container, is it still the case? Have you checked that or not? Right? So create a checklist and then review that, whether the checklist adherence was 100%, 60%, 70%, right? So that is also a KPI. Then, when the data containers talk to each other, right? There are also other parameters like refresh rate. If there's an automation done between system A to system B, container 1 to container 2, right? How frequently are they talking? And are we checking the failures in that, right? Then, you asked a question about uh, how much to keep the data, the retention, right?
Right.
So have you archived the data as per the retention policy, right? So all that also falls under the purview of the data governance. And on top of that, then there are security parameters. Like, let's say earlier how much of PII data in terms of records do we carry now? Earlier it was X. Have we moved upwards? Have we moved downwards from that X? Right? How many PSI information do we have? Do we have a proper access control on it? Right? Are the permission getting reviewed? Because sometimes you put set the permission, but nobody reviews those permission later, right? So all these things can become your KPIs, and then depending on in the entire team structure, where do you stand, a proper KPI can be assigned and can be reviewed.
So if I may ask my final question, you know, what is the role of the CEO in data governance?
CEO, right?
Yes.
Okay. So obviously, CEO is also a part of a board and also is responsible to answer to the risk committee, right? So I think in that way, CEO generally takes a lot of accountability of data loss. Okay. CEO may not take the accountability of overall data governance, because when we talk about data governance, we talked about many aspects of it, and data loss is just a risk, right?
Right.
But let's say my SAP data is lying into three different tables. The CEO is not bothered about it,
Right.
right? So I think it is very much there. CEO takes a lot of responsibility of data loss. Data governance need not be a CEO's responsibility. It should be a CIO's responsibility. That's how I would look at it. And when I say responsibility, I would not actually say responsibility. I would say accountability. The responsibility lies with every individual of our organization. A accountable person can be a CIO. That's
Okay.
how I would try and put it.
Thank you. I think we have had a very long and interesting conversation. And so we have sort of learned today that, the data governance strategy ensures, data quality, compliance, security, data utilization also. And it is supporting a lot of business operations, decision making, risk management, so it is a fairly, pervasive kind of thing throughout the organization. And it's not just about managing data, it's also about driving business success, ensuring compliance and, safeguarding customer trust. And of course, it helps you make better decisions and eventually, hopefully, drive giving you a competitive advantage in the market because you are doing good data governance. So I think Thank you so much for, shedding so much light on something which is very integral to the organization. It's continuing to become more and more important. Perhaps we can take a few questions from some delegates who have put some questions before we end the session. And I think, one of the questions is about, from Umesh Kalyankar, which is about any thoughts about data insurance and how commonly is it considered in India?
Okay, so means to be honest, I work with a lot of insurance companies when we do our take our insurance, right? So far, I have not seen a separate data insurance as such, but it is covered very much as a part of the overall cyber insurance. So the data leak, if it happens, and for which you need to do some remediation, there is a provision in the insurance where you can claim the insurance benefit against it. I will not call it as a benefit, to be honest, but whatever the compensation and whatever the loss that you incur, right? That is available as a part of the nowadays insurance policies.
Thank you. So I think there is a question which is sort of commonly asked, between data governance and the personal data protection bill, and where do we see the roles of the CISO and the DPO? So what is your thoughts around this?
So to be honest, in the draft version of the it was not DPDP earlier, it was the PDPB earlier, right?
Yes.
So in that draft, there was lot of penalties on and penalties, and actually even the jail term was also there for the DPO, right? At that time, the conversation was absolutely about, I don't want to be a DPO,
Right.
right? But I think with the PDP, DPDP, I think that is not there anymore, right? So I think now the conversations are a little better. I have seen most of the times CISOs playing the role of a DPO, but it all depends on your industry. If you are into a industry where you are processing a lot of customer data, right? I think it might make sense to put a separate DPO because again, it depends on your org structure, right? If your CISO is a technical folk, right? It's a technical person, right? At that time, CISO can continue to do a role of a chief technical security officer, right? And the DPO can take care of the governance. So it all depends on the organization's business, what they are into, and then I think, in my view, the we can decide whether the role can merge or not.
But do you see this sort of the DPO role maybe going to legal or compliance or somebody else, but not a non-technical person?
It can, as I said, right? Let's say, you are working in an industry where the lot of technology implementations are needed, and CISO can continue to work on a technology implementations, right? While the DPO is someone who is just responsible for governance, and there's no
Right.
technology needed. Why not, right? It can very well go to a legal person, or maybe nowadays there are even finance people doing a lot of external certifications on data privacy and stuff. It can even go to finance. Why not? It all depends on the type of industry, I must say, and the
Thank you.
structure of your organization.
Thank you. I think, we are probably running out of time. So I'm sure everyone who attended this session would have found your perspectives very useful and helpful. Thank you, Mr. Purandare, for taking the time to participate in this session and for sharing your knowledge and insights. And my thanks also to all delegates who attended this session, who have posted questions and comments. I hope you found the webinar interesting and informative. Please do send in your feedback and comments. I think there's a feedback form that has been shared. So please share your feedback. It will enable us to organize more such sessions. I also invite all of you to join us again on Wednesday, 22nd November, for another session that will feature some interesting conversations with security experts on topics of contemporary interest. So thank you once again, Mr. Purandare, for being here and for participating in the session. And meanwhile, it's goodbye from the CISO Forum for now. Have a safe and a wonderful and a festive weekend. Bye.